Imagine a world where collapse isn't a single, explosive event, but a slow, grinding process. A future where structural stress quietly accumulates until supply chains begin to fracture, one by one. Where confidence in the currency erodes not in a crash, but in a persistent, nagging decline. And where the federal government, once a reliable backstop, finds its ability to deliver systemic support stretched thin and unreliable. This isn't a forecast of doom. It's an educational framework, a way to understand the very real pressures on our complex systems. It is an exploration of what happens when the intricate web that holds our modern world together begins to fray, and only the foundational basics truly matter: energy, food, water, and the capacity to make essential goods. Because in a world of increasing uncertainty, most people think it's about money. It's about surplus. When the bedrock of the system shows cracks, the smartest investors and most forward-thinking citizens start asking a different kind of question. It's no longer about who is wealthy, but who is resilient. Not who has the most assets, but who can function independently when the larger grid falters. This is where tangible production and real-world resources become the ultimate measure of strength. In this series, we're ranking the states best positioned to weather such a storm. We're not looking at GDP or stock portfolios. Our framework is built on tangible, measurable metrics: a state's energy surplus, its food and water security, and its industrial depth. We've also added a culture and governance bonus for those places with a history of self-reliance and pragmatic leadership. This is about the real capacity to keep the lights on, keep people fed, and keep critical production humming. As we count down from 10 to 1, you'll start to see a clear and powerful pattern emerge. The states that thrive are not necessarily the richest or the most populous. They are the ones who have mastered the art of producing more than they consume. In this new reality, surplus becomes sovereignty. And the state kicking off our list? #10 might surprise you. At number 10 is a state built on distance, resources, and a stubborn kind of independence: Montana. In a disruption scenario, Montana's edge isn't hype, it's inputs. It has a foundation of low population density combined with a powerful resource base, making it a formidable contender for long-term viability. This isn't about surviving a weekend. It's about rewriting the rules of sustainability from the ground up. The state's energy profile is a masterclass in diversity and raw power. Massive coal reserves offer a straightforward source of thermal energy, a brute force solution when complex grids fail. But Montana doesn't stop there. It layers this with significant oil production, a growing network of wind turbines capturing the relentless prairie winds, and a robust hydroelectric system harnessing the power of its mountain rivers. This isn't just a portfolio. It's a strategic reserve of energy independence, ensuring the lights stay on when the rest of the world goes dark. Then comes the most critical layer for human survival: food and water. Montana is an agricultural powerhouse, with vast plains dedicated to grain production and sprawling ranches supporting a serious livestock capacity. You can't eat code, but you can eat beef and bread. Its water supply is just as secure, fed by the immense snowpack of the Rocky Mountains, which guarantees a steady flow into its rivers and aquifers. In a world of broken supply chains, Montana doesn't need to import its essentials. It grows them, raises them, and drinks them right from the source. Culturally, self-reliance isn't a trend here. It's a foundational principle. This is a society already wired for local problem-solving and tangible production. The economy isn't built on abstract services or digital assets, but on the real-world work of mining, timber, and agriculture. When global systems evaporate, the ability to pull resources from the ground and build with your own hands becomes the ultimate currency. Tangible production is real power. That's why Montana earns the first spot on this list, and why number 9 is already living the alone reality. Number 9 isn't just prepared for isolation, it's built around it: Alaska. Where distance is a weakness for most places, here it's a defensive moat. Alaska's geography is its first and most formidable line of defense, creating a natural buffer that insulates it from the cascading failures of more interconnected regions. It's a land where strategic isolation is not a liability, but a core asset that has shaped its entire existence. In a world of fragile supply chains, this separation provides a critical head start. Underneath that moat is a reservoir of pure power enough energy wealth to keep the lights on and the heat running when larger grids go dark. Its permanent fund, backed by tangible assets, provides a financial cushion that few states can claim. This isn't just about resource extraction. It's about a system designed for self-funding, offering asset-backed stability in an era of devalued currencies and spiraling debt. Alaska possesses the raw materials to power its own future, independent of external support systems. Food is the immediate objection. Modern Alaska imports over 90% of its goods. But this is a matter of contemporary convenience, not a reflection of its true capacity. The state's water systems are among the richest on the planet, offering a sustainable source of protein that could feed its population many times over. Its vast wilderness is teeming with game. More importantly, the knowledge of how to harvest, preserve, and prepare these resources is not a forgotten art here. It's a living tradition woven into the fabric of daily life. The potential for food sovereignty is immense. Then there's the cultural factor, which might be its greatest strength. Remote communities, genuine preparedness, and a deeply ingrained self-reliance define the Alaskan spirit. This is a place where people live with the daily understanding that help may not arrive quickly, if it arrives at all. They don't just own the tools for survival. They possess the mindset. In a world where federal support becomes unreliable, Alaska doesn't need to learn autonomy. It's been practicing it quietly this whole time. At number 8 is a state people underestimate until they understand one word: refining. Louisiana doesn't just sit near energy. It transforms raw inputs into the fuels and materials modern life runs on. Its strategic leverage is built on a trinity of power: a commanding river mouth, an extensive coastline, and a world-class petrochemical refining infrastructure. In a fractured supply chain, that conversion capability becomes leverage. Transformation matters more than extraction. You can have all the raw resources in the world and still be powerless if you can process them into something useful. Louisiana can. It takes crude oil and natural gas and turns them into gasoline, diesel, and the chemical building blocks of plastics, fertilizers, and pharmaceuticals. This industrial alchemy is the state's true strength, giving it control over a critical stage of the supply chain that few others possess. Then there's food. This isn't just about farmland. It's a complete ecosystem. Vast fields of rice and sugarcane provide foundational calories, but its dominance comes from the water. Louisiana's coastline and wetlands are home to one of the most productive seafood pipelines in the country, a constant source of protein from shrimp, crawfish, and countless fish species. This diversity matters when complex food distribution networks collapse and local production becomes paramount. And strategically, all of this is amplified by its geography. Controlling the endpoint of the Mississippi River, one of the world's most significant trade arteries, turns a simple geographic feature into undeniable power. When systems fragment, choke points decide who negotiates and who gets ignored. Louisiana holds one of the most important choke points in North America, allowing it to dictate terms on both trade and resources. That's why Louisiana can stand alone. If calories become currency, number 7 is a superpower. Coming in at number 7 is the agricultural heartland thesis in its purest form: Nebraska. In a world where financial systems lose credibility, the most basic form of wealth is the ability to produce food. This isn't glamorous, but it's foundational. Nebraska doesn't just meet demand, it generates surplus. And surplus becomes leverage when distribution breaks. Calories are continuity. Nebraska's strength begins with its massive food output. The state is a titan in the production of staples that form the bedrock of any food system: beef, corn, and soybeans. This isn't about boutique farming. It's about industrial-scale production of core calories. When supply chains fracture and the luxury of choice disappears, the ability to put high-density protein and carbohydrates on the table becomes the ultimate measure of wealth. Nebraska's consistent surplus of these essentials makes it a critical node in any simplified, post-disruption economy, capable of sustaining not only itself, but also exerting influence through trade. This staggering agricultural output is reinforced by its strong water security. Home to the vast Ogallala Aquifer and a well-developed network of rivers and reservoirs, Nebraska possesses the water resources needed to irrigate its crops and insulate its yields from the volatility of droughts that could cripple other agricultural regions. This reliable water access helps keep production stable across seasons, ensuring that its food engine doesn't sputter when the climate becomes unpredictable. It's a key variable that transforms agricultural potential into dependable reality. Energy resilience matters too, and Nebraska demonstrates a pragmatic approach. The state has built a diversified grid with a significant and growing wind capacity, which decentralizes power generation and reduces reliance on a single fuel source. This is complemented by steady baseload power from other sources, ensuring grid stability even when the wind isn't blowing. This balanced energy portfolio reduces dependence on external inputs and shores up the state's ability to power its own critical infrastructure, from irrigation pumps to processing plants. Finally, Nebraska's advantage is solidified by its real economy loop, where production, processing, and manufacturing are tightly integrated. It's not just a place where crops are grown. It's where they are processed into finished goods, stored in massive facilities, and moved by locally manufactured equipment. This closed-loop system, centered on essentials, means the state's economy is tied to tangible goods, not abstract services. When systems simplify, the states that produce and control their own necessities become the ones that remain standing. Now we enter states that export energy, not just food. Sliding into number 6 is a state forged in mountains and built on hard resources: West Virginia. Its core advantage is simple. It produces more energy than it consumes. In an era of fragile grids and geopolitical uncertainty, this isn't just a line item on a spreadsheet. It's a strategic asset. West Virginia is a powerhouse of both coal and natural gas, making it one of the nation's top net energy exporters. While the world chases new technologies, this state holds the keys to foundational power. In a disruption, surplus energy is not just comfort, it's power for industry, a critical buffer against scarcity, and a high-value commodity for trade with energy-poor neighbors. This foundation of raw power is the first and most critical layer of its strategic depth. The second layer is built on the logic of reconstruction. When complex global supply chains inevitably falter, the focus shifts from consumption to repair, from acquiring new to maintaining old. This is where materials become paramount. West Virginia's industrial history is tied to coal and steel, the very building blocks of modern infrastructure. This institutional knowledge doesn't just disappear. It's embedded in the workforce and the landscape. The ability to produce, or at least process, the raw materials needed for rebuilding, from reinforcing a bridge to fabricating a replacement part, is an almost forgotten but vital capability. It's a bet on grit over glamour, on substance over service. Geography adds the third and perhaps most durable layer. The state is defined by the Appalachian Mountains, a terrain that is both a resource and a fortress. These mountains are covered in dense hardwood forests, providing a sustainable source of timber for construction and fuel. They hold abundant fresh water, secured in rivers and aquifers, shielded from the droughts plaguing other regions. But the terrain itself is the ultimate asset. The winding valleys, steep ridges, and limited access routes create natural choke points, making large-scale movements difficult to coordinate and easy to defend. This is resilience built into the terrain, but the final multiplier isn't found on a map or a resource chart. It's cultural. This is a society shaped by generations of hard labor, geographic isolation, and a deep-seated reliance on local community. When centralized systems wobble, these are not the communities that will panic. They are accustomed to making do, to relying on neighbors, and to solving problems with the tools at hand. This is a culture of toughness, of self-reliance born from necessity. West Virginia isn't sleek or optimized for a globalized world. It's rugged, and rugged tends to last. From here on, the states become complete systems. We're at the halfway point, and the empires only become more complex and integrated from here. If this analysis helps you better understand the dynamics of imperial power, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more content. The top 5 is where the list transitions from merely influential to truly representing complete, self-sustaining political and economic systems. Now, let's continue with the countdown. Cracking the top 5 is an industrial and agricultural powerhouse, Pennsylvania. Its resilience begins with a massive natural gas base, domestic fuel capacity that can power homes and run factories when other regions face uncertainty. This energy isn't just for export. It's the bedrock of the state's self-sufficiency, ensuring the lights stay on and the assembly lines keep moving. But Pennsylvania's strength isn't just about raw energy. It possesses a deep manufacturing legacy that remains critical in a volatile world. This is where raw materials are transformed into vital goods. The state's industrial core is built on metals, heavy machinery, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals, the building blocks of a modern economy. It also has a powerful food processing sector, turning agricultural output into products ready for consumption. This ability to make things, from basic metals to complex medicines, provides a layer of security that consumption-heavy economies lack. This industrial capacity is sustained by another fundamental advantage: abundant agriculture and water. Pennsylvania's rich farmland and reliable water resources support its population and its production centers. This integration means food and industry don't have to compete for scarce resources or depend on fragile, long-distance supply chains. The water feeds the cities, irrigates the fields, and cools the machinery, creating a stable foundation for the entire system. It all forms a self-reinforcing loop. Energy powers the industry, and the industry produces the essentials that a resilient society needs, all supported by a strong agricultural base. A complete system powers itself and produces essentials. This combination of energy independence, industrial depth, and agricultural sustenance is what places Pennsylvania firmly in the top tier of resilient states. Next is a state where energy dominance meets strategic positioning. Coming in at number 4 is a state with the full survival toolkit: Oklahoma. Energy is the headline. Oklahoma presents a powerful, diversified energy portfolio that ensures resilience when external grids become unreliable. Its formidable production of both oil and natural gas is fundamental, powering transportation and heating homes and industries from within. This is not just about raw output. It is about leveraging internal infrastructure to maintain core functions. Critically, this traditional energy sector is complemented by a massive and growing wind power capacity. This diversification is a strategic advantage. It means that when one source faces constraints, be it a pipeline disruption or a calm day, another is ready to carry the load, securing a consistent flow of power that underpins all other survival activities. Next is food security, built on foundational staples. Oklahoma is a heartland of American agriculture, and its output is focused on what matters most in a crisis: calories and protein. The state's vast fields of wheat provide the grain necessary for bread, a simple but essential component of sustenance. Alongside this, its massive cattle industry ensures a stable supply of meat. These are not niche products or luxury goods. They are the bedrock of a food system designed for stability. In a world of simplified supply chains, producing your own staples is the ultimate guarantee of nourishment. Beyond energy and food, Oklahoma possesses a crucial, often overlooked element of self-sufficiency: its industrial base. The state has a robust manufacturing sector, particularly skilled in machinery and heavy equipment. This isn't just about building new things. It's about keeping existing systems running when replacements are no longer an option. Repair capacity is survival capacity. The ability to fabricate parts, maintain vehicles, and fix agricultural equipment locally means that the state has essential machinery won't grind to a halt. This practical, hands-on industry ensures the longevity of critical infrastructure. Finally, geography provides a powerful, passive defense. Oklahoma's central location shields it from the vulnerabilities plaguing coastal regions, from extreme weather to dependency on fragile maritime trade. Its position at the crossroads of the nation's interior also keeps vital trade routes open, allowing for commerce and mutual support with neighboring states without relying on compromised coastal corridors. Energy, food, industry, and a strategic location, Oklahoma combines these core components into a cohesive strategy for independence, ready to function when complex systems simplify. Top 3 are defined by surplus with minimal strain. Breaking into the top 3 is a state people overlook until you measure it in surplus: North Dakota. Its strength rests on 2 pillars: energy and agriculture. Major oil output provides independence and leverage, while large wind capacity adds redundancy that doesn't depend on constant fuel logistics. This isn't just about having resources. It's about having a mix that's hard to disrupt. Oil from the Bakken Shale offers high-density power that can be stored and transported, a critical asset when supply chains falter. But relying solely on fossil fuels creates vulnerabilities. That's where the wind farms come in. Spread across the plains, they capture a distributed, inexhaustible resource that doesn't require a single tanker or pipeline to operate. This combination means North Dakota can keep the lights on and the pumps running through crises that would cripple states dependent on a single, fragile energy source. This system is built for resilience, not just peak performance. Then comes food. North Dakota produces far more than local demand, and that gap surplus over consumption becomes bargaining power when trade turns selective. It's a leader in crops like wheat, soybeans, and sunflowers, but the real strategic advantage lies in its infrastructure. Extensive grain storage facilities and processing plants mean the state doesn't just grow food. It can hold, manage, and transform it. This turns a perishable harvest into a durable asset. When other regions face shortages, North Dakota's ability to control a massive, ready-to-distribute food supply translates directly into influence. What looks empty is actually capacity. The state also benefits from low strain, fewer people relative to resources, plus fiscal buffers that can keep essential services running longer than most expect. North Dakota has a history of conservative fiscal management, building up rainy day funds and sovereign wealth funds fueled by oil revenues. This isn't just government savings. It's a strategic reserve. When a crisis drains tax receipts and federal support waivers, these reserves allow the state to continue funding police, maintaining roads, and operating critical services without interruption. It's a buffer against systemic shock, ensuring continuity when other governments are forced into austerity. Cold winters and empty horizons look like disadvantages until instability makes low demand a strategic asset. With one of the lowest population densities in the country, the per capita burden on infrastructure, water, and emergency services is minimal. There are fewer mouths to feed, fewer homes to power, and fewer people competing for finite resources. This low-density model, often seen as a sign of economic stagnation, becomes a profound strength in a world of scarcity. It maximizes the value of every unit of surplus. Now take that surplus per person idea and push it to the extreme. Our runner-up is a place of rugged individualism and extreme per capita advantage: Wyoming. The logic here is profoundly simple. Enormous energy production paired with very low demand. This state sits on a colossal foundation of coal, complemented by significant oil and natural gas reserves. In a stable world, this is a valuable asset. But in a fractured one, it becomes a strategic linchpin. When national systems destabilize and energy grids flicker, the imbalance between Wyoming's massive supply and its minimal internal needs translates directly into power. It has a formula for maintaining local continuity with more than enough surplus left over for decisive trade. The state wouldn't just be keeping its own lights on. It would be in a position to decide who else gets to keep theirs on too. This per capita energy advantage is almost unmatched, creating a buffer against systemic shocks that few other places can claim. The sheer scale of its energy resources relative to its population makes it a fortress of BTUs, a reality that becomes increasingly critical as complex supply chains begin to fail. On the surface, Wyoming might seem like a challenging environment for food production, but this perception is misleading. Food security here is more stable than many assume, grounded in a deeply entrenched ranching culture that provides a reliable and decentralized source of protein. This isn't a system dependent on fragile, long-distance logistics. It's built on local knowledge and resilient livestock. Furthermore, the state as agricultural viability is underpinned by a crucial hydrological advantage: vast mountain ranges that capture and store immense quantities of snowpack. This snowmelt feeds the rivers and aquifers that support both its small population and its agricultural production with minimal competition for resources. In a future where water rights become a primary source of conflict, Wyoming's access to a renewable, gravity-fed water supply is an incalculable asset, ensuring that both its people and its food systems remain hydrated and functional. One of Wyoming's most potent, yet often overlooked, strengths is its demographic structure. With the lowest population of any state in the nation, the potential for internal strain is dramatically reduced. Fewer people mean less competition for essential resources, from water and food to housing and medical care. This low population density inherently limits the risk of large-scale civil unrest that could paralyze more crowded states. Governance is simpler, infrastructure is under less constant pressure, and the social fabric is less likely to tear under duress. This isn't just about having more to go around. It is about a fundamental reduction in the friction that grinds societies to a halt during a crisis. The state's demographic reality acts as a natural shock absorber, allowing it to weather disruptions that would trigger cascading failures in more densely populated regions. Low strain turns resources into stability. Culturally and economically, Wyoming is built on a foundation of tangible, real-world industries, not fragile service economies dependent on abstract financial flows or digital infrastructure. The state's identity is forged in mining, ranching, and energy extraction sectors that produce physical goods and essential commodities. This creates a workforce and a mindset grounded in practical skills and self-reliance. When global networks of information and finance become unreliable, a society that knows how to pull resources from the ground and build things with its hands possesses an intrinsic resilience. The economy is less vulnerable to the collapse of distant markets or the failure of complex technological systems. Wyoming doesn't need a complicated narrative to justify its resilience. Its strength is written into the land and the character of its people. It needs only one thing to fully realize its advantage: for the outside world to stop functioning the way it used to. Number one has a structural feature no other state can replicate. And now the number one state, not just a survivor, but a potential nation-state by capability: Texas. Its advantage begins with energy dominance. Texas is not merely a producer. It is an entire energy ecosystem. It drills for oil and gas at a scale that dwarfs other states, but its true power lies in its vertical integration. The state doesn't just extract raw materials. It refines them into gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel through a sprawling network of coastal refineries. This control over the full supply chain, from wellhead to finished product, provides an unparalleled degree of energy security. But the strategy is also diversified. Texas has aggressively built out its renewable capacity, particularly in wind power, where it leads the nation. This blend of traditional fossil fuels and forward-looking renewables creates a resilient energy profile, capable of adapting to market shifts or supply disruptions. In a world defined by energy scarcity, Texas has a surplus. The true differentiator, however, is its structural autonomy, epitomized by its independent power grid. The Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT, manages the flow of electric power to more than 26 million Texas customers, representing about 90% of the state's electric load. Unlike every other state in the continental U.S., Texas operates a grid with minimal connections to the national system. This design choice is a double-edged sword, but in a scenario of widespread systemic failure, it becomes a strategic fortress. While cascading blackouts could cripple interconnected regions, Texas possesses the institutional and technical capacity to isolate its grid from external chaos. It might face its own challenges, but it doesn't automatically inherit the failures of others. This is not just an engineering detail. It is a foundational element of its potential sovereignty. Then comes its industrial depth, which extends far beyond energy. Texas is a manufacturing titan with a diverse industrial base that provides both economic strength and strategic flexibility. Its Gulf Coast is the heart of America's petrochemical industry, producing the chemical building blocks essential for everything from plastics to pharmaceuticals. But its capacity doesn't stop there. The state is a major hub for electronics and semiconductor manufacturing, critical components for all modern technology. Furthermore, its aerospace sector, from NASA's Johnson Space Center to a growing private space industry, represents high-end engineering and logistical prowess. This industrial mix means Texas has the latent capacity to retool its factories to meet new strategic demands, whether for defense, medicine, or essential consumer goods. Finally, we consider its foundational strengths in agriculture and trade. Texas is a powerhouse in food production, leading the nation in cattle and possessing vast agricultural lands dedicated to cotton, grains, and produce. In a crisis, this capacity could feed its large population with a significant surplus left over. This agricultural might is complemented by its logistical infrastructure. Its deep water ports, like the Port of Houston, are among the busiest in the world, providing access to global maritime trade routes. Critically, its long border with Mexico offers a cross-border trade optionality that is independent of East or West Coast port disruptions. This combination of self-sufficient food production and versatile trade access solidifies its standalone capability. When you combine its energy surplus, its industrial scale, and its unique infrastructural independence, you see a clear picture. Surplus plus scale equals stability. So there you have it, our ranking of the world's most defensible countries based on the unforgiving logic of geography. The pattern that emerges from this analysis is clear. The most secure nations are not defined by the size of their armies or the sophistication of their weapons. They are defined by tangible geographic advantages. They are buffered by vast oceans or impassable mountain ranges. They possess internal rivers that facilitate trade and defense. They have climates and fertile lands that ensure they can feed their own people. And critically, their neighbors are either too weak, too distant, or too disinterested to pose a genuine existential threat. These are not countries that win through aggression. They win by being difficult, costly, and ultimately unrewarding targets. Security, in its purest form, is a function of the landscape itself, a permanent and unyielding fortress gifted by nature. It is a reality that often gets lost in discussions dominated by military budgets and technological arms races. But geography is the foundation upon which all national power is built. The most resilient nations understand that their greatest strength lies not in what they project outward, but in the inherent defensibility of their own homeland, a principle that has held true for centuries. This entire discussion is an educational exercise, an attempt to understand global power through the fundamental and often brutal lens of geopolitics, not through a forecast of future conflicts. We are not predicting invasions or wars. We are exploring the permanent structural factors that shape a nation's destiny. By stripping away the noise of daily headlines and focusing on the constants of mountains, oceans, and rivers, we gain a deeper appreciation for why some countries enjoy a level of security that others can only dream of. It's a framework for thinking, a way to see the world map not just as a collection of borders, but as a dynamic chessboard where the terrain dictates the rules of the game. This perspective helps explain historical trends and provides a powerful tool for analyzing the strategic calculations that leaders must make. The goal is to build a more robust understanding of international relations, grounded in the timeless and unchanging realities of the physical world. It's an intellectual journey into the core of what makes a country safe, moving beyond transient alliances and political rhetoric to see the bedrock of national security. Now I want your take. If you had to choose just one geographic feature, oceans, mountains, or rivers, which provides the ultimate defensive advantage, and why?